Mustang horse blocks ambulance, begging for help. What happens next will shock you. The evening was unusually calm, with the type of quiet that made every rustling leaf or distant animal noise seem unnervingly loud. Inside the speeding ambulance, the paramedics were laser-focused. The sirens cut through the stillness as they rushed to an emergency, a patient in critical condition. The rhythmic hum of the engine was the only sound inside the vehicle, save for the occasional beeping of the medical equipment. Their eyes darted between the road ahead and the patient, but then a sudden movement up ahead made the driver slam his foot down on the brake. The headlights illuminated the figure, a wild Mustang standing tall and unmoving in the middle of the road. It wasn't just any horse, it was a Mustang, known for its untamed spirit, and it had positioned itself directly in the path of the speeding ambulance. Time seemed to slow, and for a moment everyone inside the ambulance could only stare at the animal. Their hearts raced. The driver yanked the wheel to the right, narrowly avoiding a collision, and the tires screamed in protest as they skidded on the road. The Mustang remained motionless, its wild, deep brown eyes locked onto the vehicle, as if it had known what would happen next. What was it doing? Why wasn't it running like any other wild animal? It stood there challenging fate itself, its powerful presence a stark contrast to the quiet night. Even as the ambulance came to a complete stop, the Mustang did not retreat. The paramedics exchanged puzzled glances, wondering what could be going through the animal's mind. Most wild animals, when confronted with a vehicle barreling down at them, would flee in a panic, but this horse wasn't fleeing. It was standing its ground, eyes wide, ears perked up, its body language filled with a sense of urgency, but not fear. The driver honked the horn, hoping the sound would startle the horse away, but it didn't even flinch. Instead, the Mustang shifted its stance, moving into the middle of the road, blocking their path entirely. The headlights bathed the creature in an eerie glow, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. Something wasn't right. The tension in the ambulance grew thick. Was the horse lost? Was it hurt? No one knew, but it was clear the animal wasn't going anywhere until they did something about it. The minutes dragged on, with the paramedics trapped in a strange stalemate between the urgent emergency they were rushing to and the increasingly bizarre situation unfolding before them. Then the Mustang did something no one expected. It lifted its head to the sky and let out a powerful, desperate neigh, one that rang through the cold night like a cry for help. The sound was more than just an ordinary call. It was full of panic, as if the horse was trying to communicate something profound, something urgent. The sound carried through the stillness, piercing the quiet night and shaking the air. It was a cry that resonated deep within the hearts of those who heard it. The horse wasn't just standing there. It wasn't just lost. It was trying to tell them something. The paramedics, still bewildered, exchanged looks, trying to make sense of it all. What could this horse possibly need from them? The driver cautiously eased the ambulance forward, but the Mustang refused to step aside. Instead, it stomped its hooves violently on the ground, as if trying to get their attention, urging them to listen. One of the paramedics, a seasoned professional who had seen his fair share of bizarre situations, stepped out into the cold night air. His boots crunched against the gravel as he cautiously approached the animal. The Mustang's eyes never left him, intense, almost pleading. Every movement it made seemed deliberate, full of intention. The paramedic held his breath, trying to read the animal. It was as if they were locked in a moment of silent communication. There was no anger in the horse's gaze, only raw, desperate emotion. It wasn't just afraid, it was on the brink of something else. Something crucial. The paramedic, his heart racing with a strange urgency, stepped closer, and in that moment everything changed. It was clear this was no coincidence. The Mustang had brought them here for a reason, and it wasn't going to leave until they understood why. The paramedic stood there, his hand still on the door of the ambulance, staring at the Mustang. There was something in its eyes, a silent plea, an urgency that he couldn't ignore. The sound of the ambulance's sirens and the chatter of his colleagues started to fade as he focused solely on the horse. For a moment he was torn. The ambulance was waiting. There was a patient inside, a person who needed his help. His training told him to go back, to ignore the horse and get to the emergency. But something deep inside him told him this wasn't just any horse. It wasn't just an animal lost on the road. This Mustang had something important to show him. His instincts screamed at him to follow. He couldn't explain why, but he felt an unexplainable connection. The Mustang wasn't just standing there. It was waiting, as if it had been expecting him. It was as though the animal knew something he didn't, something that could make all the difference. As the paramedics slowly stepped away from the ambulance, he heard his colleagues' voices calling after him. They asked what he was doing, but he didn't answer. He couldn't explain it. He just knew he had to follow this horse. His legs moved on their own, carrying him toward the creature. The Mustang's eyes never left his, and with each step he took, he felt the pull, growing stronger. The air felt heavier now, like everything around him was slowing down. His heart raced as the distance between him and the ambulance grew, but the Mustang seemed completely calm, as if it knew exactly where it was going, and it was waiting for him to catch up. The paramedic's feet shifted from the solid pavement of the road to the softer, uneven earth of the forest path. His boots made soft, crunching sounds as they pressed against the gravel and dry leaves. The transition from the smooth, predictable road to this wild, untamed ground felt strange, yet it was exactly where he needed to be. The Mustang's steps were steady and sure, as if it had walked this path many times before. The paramedic stumbled a bit as he tried to keep up. He wasn't used to walking in such uneven terrain, and the path was getting steeper as they climbed a small hill. His breath became shallow, but he didn't stop. The Mustang moved effortlessly through the brush, and for a brief moment, he felt like he was intruding in a world that didn't belong to him. But he couldn't turn back now. The animal had led him this far, and there was no way he could give up. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sounds of the ambulance and his team were now completely gone. All that remained was the Mustang and him. The deeper they went into the wilderness, the more the world seemed to shift. The trees grew closer together, their branches arching over the path, creating a canopy that dimmed the light. The path wasn't just difficult to walk on. It was wild, untamed, as if it had been waiting for someone to discover it. There was no clear trail to follow, just the horse's movements, guiding him. With each step, the paramedic's mind raced with questions. Why was he doing this? What was the Mustang trying to show him? He wanted to turn back, to check on the patient, but something stopped him. Every time he thought about leaving, the Mustang's steady presence kept pulling him forward. It was as if the horse knew what was at stake. After what seemed like hours, the Mustang finally slowed its pace. The paramedic stopped to catch his breath, wiping the sweat from his brow, but the horse didn't move forward anymore. Instead, it stopped in front of a small, hidden cave. It was barely visible from the path, almost as if it had been tucked away by nature itself. The horse stood still, its head turned toward the dark entrance of the cave. For a moment, the paramedic stood frozen, looking at the cave. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, a mixture of awe and fear. Something told him that this was it. This was the place the horse had been leading him to. The Mustang looked back at him, its eyes filled with something deep, an understanding, a knowledge. It didn't nudge him forward or make a sound. It simply waited, as though its task had been completed. The paramedic felt a sudden urge to step closer, to explore the cave. He didn't know why, but he was certain this was where he was meant to be. His breath caught in his throat as he looked at the cave, unsure of what he would find inside. But there was no turning back now. He had come this far, and the Mustang had led him here for a reason. Slowly, cautiously he moved toward the entrance, the darkness waiting for him, and the Mustang standing as his silent guide. As the paramedic stepped into the dark cave, his senses were immediately hit by a cold, damp air. The Mustang stood at the entrance, its figure outlined by the dim light outside, watching over him like a silent guardian. The cave stretched out before him, filled with shadows that seemed to shift with the rhythm of his breath. His footsteps echoed softly as he moved further in, feeling his way along the rough stone walls. It was then that he saw it. At the far end of the cave, nestled in the corner, was a sight so strange, so unexpected, that it left him frozen in place. His eyes struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. The cave, it seemed, had been turned into a makeshift shelter, a small nest of hay and leaves, and lying within it, a woman. She was unconscious, her body curled tightly as though trying to protect herself from the cold. Her hair was tangled and her clothes were torn and dirty. It was clear that she had been there for a while, but what struck the paramedic the most was the expression on her face. There was an undeniable peace, even in the midst of her apparent suffering. She wasn't just a lost soul. She seemed like someone waiting for help. But the real shock came when he saw the object resting in her lap, a small, delicate bundle wrapped in cloth. The paramedic's heart skipped a beat as he slowly moved closer, the Mustang following behind him, now standing just outside the cave, still as a statue. As the paramedic reached the woman, he bent down, carefully lifting the bundle from her hands. He unwrapped the cloth gently, his heart racing. Inside, wrapped in soft layers, was a newborn baby. The tiny infant's eyes were shut, its breathing shallow but steady. The paramedic let out a sharp breath, his hand shaking as he realized what he was holding. This child, so small, so vulnerable, had been left here, hidden away in this cave. It was a scene that didn't make sense. Why was she here? How had she ended up in this remote cave with an infant? And most importantly, why had the Mustang brought him here? The answers eluded him, but the urgency in the air was undeniable. This woman and her baby needed help, and he was the one meant to give it. The paramedic's mind raced as he processed the sight before him. He looked back at the Mustang, which stood motionless at the entrance of the cave, its gaze still fixed on him. The animal's presence felt almost prophetic. This wasn't just a random discovery. The horse had led him here for a reason. But why? In a moment of clarity, he realized something. This woman and her child had been here for far too long, alone and in need of rescue. The Mustang hadn't just brought him here by chance. It had sensed their plight. It had seen them, perhaps, struggling for survival, and knowing no one else could hear their cries, the Mustang had decided to act. It was guiding the paramedic here, leading him to this cave where a mother and child had been left to fend for themselves. As the paramedic gently cradled the baby, he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't a simple rescue mission. It was a life-or-mathy race against time. He had to get them out of there, back to safety, to the hospital where they could receive the care they desperately needed. He moved toward the woman now, his hands working quickly as he checked for any signs of injury. Her pulse was weak, but it was there. She was alive, though barely. She had been through something unimaginable, but it wasn't over yet. He couldn't let it end here, not like this. As the paramedic prepared to lift the woman, his mind flashed to all the things that could go wrong. How had they gotten here? Who had left them stranded? And why had they chosen this remote place, this cave, to hide away from the world? His questions buzzed around him, but one truth rang out louder than the rest. This wasn't just about saving lives. It was about uncovering the truth behind everything that had happened. Just as he was about to call for help, a startling thought gripped him. He stopped dead in his tracks. He had been so focused on the woman and the baby that he hadn't fully processed the implications of what he had just discovered. The Mustang. It had been waiting for him, watching him. It had led him here. But the question now was, why hadn't the horse just run off once he'd arrived? It stood by him, still, its gaze unwavering. The horse had an intimate connection to the scene before him. This wasn't a simple act of a wild animal guiding a person to help. This Mustang was part of the story. Could the woman be connected to the Mustang in some way? Had she been its owner, or was there something more behind the animal's actions? The questions piled on top of one another, threatening to overwhelm him, but then a cold chill ran down his spine. What if there was more at stake here than a simple rescue? His realization was as sudden as it was horrifying. What if the woman wasn't just someone in need of help? What if she was somehow tied to the mystery that had brought him here? Something even deeper and darker than he could have imagined. As he turned to look at the Mustang, the weight of the moment hit him. The horse hadn't just led him here to save lives. It had led him into a story far more complicated, one that might not have a simple answer. The Mustang wasn't just a guide. It was a key, and the answers it held would change everything. He couldn't leave now. There was a bigger mystery at play, and he was only beginning to understand it. The Mustang, the woman, the baby. This was far from over. The paramedic's heart raced as the weight of the situation hit him. The baby, though breathing, was dangerously close to the brink. And the woman? She was barely hanging on. Time was not on their side. The cave, cold and isolated, had been their shelter for far too long. The paramedic quickly made his decision. He couldn't waste another second. He needed to get them to safety, to medical attention, and fast. Carefully, he wrapped the infant in a thick blanket and held it close, making sure the tiny body was protected from the elements. He turned back to the woman, assessing her state. Her skin was pale and her breathing shallow, but there was hope. The pulse, though faint, was steady. With one arm, he gently slid under her shoulders, cradling her as best as he could. With the other, he motioned for the Mustang to follow. As he made his way out of the cave, every step felt like it could be their last. He had no time to be cautious. The cold, the darkness, the rough terrain, none of it mattered now. Every second counted. His breath was short as he navigated through the narrow passage, his thoughts focused solely on getting them out. The Mustang, sensing the urgency, trotted behind him. It wasn't just a passive observer, it was a part of this mission. Every now and then the horse would nudge him gently, as if urging him to go faster. Its presence was comforting, steadying him in the chaos of the moment. The paramedic knew he had to rely on his training, his instincts, and perhaps more than anything, the unspoken bond between him and the Mustang that had led him here. The night seemed endless as they pushed forward, but each step was a victory. They finally reached the ambulance, the flashing lights a beacon of hope in the distance. The paramedic rushed the woman and child into the vehicle, his heart pounding in his chest. The Mustang lingered just outside, standing tall and watchful, its eyes never leaving them. Once inside the ambulance, the paramedic worked quickly, assessing the baby's condition first. The infant was still breathing, but its pulse was weak. There was no time to waste. He needed to stabilize the baby before it was too late. As he began administering oxygen and adjusting the medical equipment, he glanced at the woman. Her face was still pale, but she was alive. The journey was far from over, but they had made it this far. As the paramedic focused on the woman trying to stabilize her condition, something extraordinary happened. The Mustang, which had followed them to the ambulance, suddenly stepped forward. It was as though the animal understood what needed to be done. The horse, calm and unbothered by the noise of the emergency vehicle, paced back and forth, as if waiting for the right moment. Then the Mustang's actions took everyone by surprise. It wasn't just standing there. It seemed to be observing the situation with a level of intelligence that was almost human. The animal had seen the woman and child in distress, and now it was waiting, watching, calculating. The paramedic, busy tending to the woman, didn't notice at first. But then the Mustang nudged the door of the ambulance with its head, a gentle but persistent push. It was as if the animal was trying to get his attention, telling him something was wrong. Confused, the paramedic stopped for a moment, glancing up at the horse outside. The Mustang let out a soft whinny, a sound that wasn't just a call but an alert. The paramedic's eyes widened in realization. He quickly ran to the ambulance door, looking outside, but there was nothing unusual. It wasn't the surrounding environment that concerned the horse. It was the woman. The Mustang's gaze was fixed on her, and for a moment, the paramedic felt as if the animal could sense something he hadn't noticed. At first, he dismissed it, thinking he was just imagining things. But the horse's urgency and focus wouldn't let him ignore it. He moved back to the woman, checking her vitals once again. That's when he noticed it. The faint change in her pulse, the slight irregularity. The Mustang had known something was wrong before he had. Without hesitation, the paramedic adjusted his course of action, quickly administering a more aggressive treatment to stabilize her. As he did so, he couldn't help but marvel at the Mustang's behavior. It was as if the horse was working alongside him, communicating in a way that transcended human language. It wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a partnership. The Mustang's instinctive intelligence had saved precious minutes, allowing him to act quickly and decisively. When the baby's condition began to improve and the woman started to regain consciousness, the paramedic realized how much he owed to the Mustang. The horse had not only guided him to this discovery, but had played a crucial role in ensuring their survival. The animal's actions had been a reminder that some bonds go beyond words or understanding. They are a shared sense of purpose, a deep connection between two beings working together for the greater good. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, the paramedic couldn't help but glance back at the Mustang, still standing outside, watching them go. He knew that this wasn't the end of the story. There was so much more to uncover about the woman, the baby, and the horse's mysterious connection to them. But one thing was clear. The Mustang was no ordinary animal. It was a guardian, a protector, and, in a sense, a partner in the fight for survival. The race against time wasn't over yet, but thanks to the Mustang's unexpected intelligence and unwavering commitment, they were one step closer to safety. And as they sped toward the hospital, the paramedic could only wonder, what else had the Mustang seen? And what was it trying to tell them next? As the ambulance finally arrived at the hospital, the paramedic rushed the woman and child into the emergency room. The medical team was ready, prepared for the worst, but grateful for the vital seconds the Mustang had helped save. They took over the care of the woman and child, and the paramedic stepped back, exhausted but relieved. But as he turned to leave, he was startled to see the Mustang standing at the hospital entrance, its powerful silhouette framed by the setting sun. The horse had followed them every step of the way, never leaving their side, and now it was watching, waiting for something. The paramedic felt a strange lump in his throat. There was something deeply emotional in the horse's quiet presence. It wasn't just a simple animal. It was a guardian, a protector. And it had played a role in saving lives. The Mustang's eyes met his, and for a moment the paramedic swore he saw a deep understanding in them. It wasn't just a goodbye. It was an acknowledgement of the bond they had shared, however brief. The horse had done everything in its power to ensure the woman and child's safety. Now it seemed ready to leave, knowing its mission had been fulfilled. With one final, slow, and deliberate step back, the Mustang turned and walked away from the hospital, disappearing into the night. The paramedic stood there, watching it go, a mix of gratitude and awe swelling in his chest. It wasn't just a horse. It was a symbol of loyalty, of courage, and of the power of connection between humans and animals. The events of that night would stay with the paramedic forever. What had started as an ordinary rescue mission had transformed into something extraordinary. The Mustang, a wild, untamed animal, had become an inseparable part of the journey. It had not only led them to the woman and child, but had also played an instrumental role in their survival. For the paramedic, it was a reminder that there's something beyond the surface when it comes to animals. They aren't just creatures of instinct. They are capable of understanding, compassion, and, most importantly, connection. In the most dire of circumstances, the Mustang had shown him what true loyalty and teamwork meant. It wasn't just a bond between the paramedic and the horse. It was the bond between all living things that strive to help, protect, and care for each other. The woman, when she finally regained full consciousness, shared her story. She had been lost and alone, desperate to find her way back to safety. And in her darkest hour, the Mustang had appeared, leading her out of the wilderness. The horse had known exactly what to do, and in that moment, it wasn't just an animal. It was a companion, a friend, a protector. The woman's recovery was slow but steady, and the baby grew stronger with each passing day. It was clear that the Mustang's intervention had saved their lives, but its true significance wasn't in the actions alone. It was in the way it had brought people together. The bond between the woman, her child, and the paramedic was a testament to the power of working together, to the miracles that can happen when we trust in one another, and sometimes in the unexpected help of an animal. As the story of the Mustang's heroic action spread, it served as a powerful reminder of the incredible impact animals can have on our lives. They are not just pets or creatures in the wild. They are partners, friends, and unsung heroes. If you've ever had an animal change your life, help you in a moment of need, or form an unbreakable bond with you, share your story. Let us honor these remarkable beings and the connections they create. If you're moved by this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Let's celebrate the powerful relationships between humans and animals, and always remember, in the most challenging moments, sometimes the ones who save us are the ones we least expect.